I just want to share with you the sort of moment from memory of when I learned how to hit a high draw with the driver. And it's kind of one of those things, and I think when you're younger and you learn how to get into golf, and from memory being a junior golfer, the thing that you're interested in is how far you can hit the ball. That's all it is. And if you're a grandparent or a parent who's trying to get your kids to learn how to play golf, my first piece of advice is try not to interfere that much at all. Because one, they probably won't listen to you anyway, and two, the likelihood of you giving really solid advice is going to be unlikely. Now, depends on the age. I'm sort of talking, you know, anything from 4 to potentially maybe 9. Just sort of leave them alone and just let them try and figure out how to hit the golf ball far. Because that's what you kind of do from memory as a kid. You know, obviously I can't remember when I first started hitting a golf ball what I remembered, but I remember as I got a little older, I was more interested in learning how to hit the golf ball far. And then what I started to do is you start to learn how to hit different types of golf shots. And what promotes this is, I remember as a junior, I'd go and play with a group of friends, and what we would do is we'd play cross-country golf. Now what cross-country golf is instead of playing the first hole at the golf club conventionally, you would tee off from the first hole and you'd play to like the 4th green, right? And this means you have to concoct all sorts of different shots. And that was the moment when I sort of realised that, you know, that's how you make a swing change. You make a swing change based on the ball flight. That's what I think most people lose sight of. You've got to have a ball flight in mind that you're trying to achieve that's then going to trigger that type of motion. And don't underestimate that, that's really important. But I also think it's naive to suggest to, if a relatively beginner golfer came through that door and I said, oh, just hit a high draw, they'll go, oh, okay, boom, this. So that's why I'm going to advance this with obviously more understanding. Now, look, the big question I always get is the driver any different to the irons? And the answer, in my opinion, is not really. There are differences with the driver in terms of you're going to move the ball further forward because we're going to try and hit more up on the ball. But in terms of from a general mechanics perspective, it's very similar. However, what you are trying to do with the driver that we don't want to underestimate is you are trying to get the feeling of, shall we say, hitting up on the golf ball more than you would with the iron. And this lends me to the high draw. So the first thing that I would try and, you know, suggest you guys, because this is what helps me get that feeling, and when I got that discovery, was to get the feeling of this type of motion here, dropping this trail shoulder down. Now, what often happens with golfers when I sort of mention this is they'll go, yeah, okay, I get that, but Russ, every time I do that, the club bottoms out here, and this was upon my discovery. So what I used to do when we used to play cross-country golf is I used to really picture the gap where I was trying to swing my hands to, and that's something I wouldn't underestimate for lots of you out there. It is understanding that the golf swing fundamentally comes 100% down to what you're trying to do with your hands, and your body will take on the shape to help you move your hands into a certain direction. So the feeling that I want you to try and incorporate is the feeling of the hands going up. Okay, that's the feeling that we need to do. Now the best way to sort of practice this is to get yourself up against the wall at home. So I'm going to draw a red line here, okay, because it's going to visually better example this. So if you imagine I started about a foot away from my imaginary wall, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus particularly on my right hand, so that I'm getting my hand on the wall. Okay, so I've managed to touch that, but then the question is, well, how would I go higher up the wall and higher up the wall? Okay, and can you see the way I'm doing this is the way I'm sort of moving now? So I'm going more up this way. And I'll always remember when I play cross-country golf, you would be forced to try and hit through all these weird angles and peculiar positions, and that's what kind of ends up promoting these different types of motion. And that's when I started to go, oh wow, that worked. I remember that feeling of getting those hands moving up towards that gateway that I was looking at, and that helped me produce that feeling of hitting up on the ball, which therefore helps produce that sort of drawing sensation. So what's important, and I do this with students, is that, you know, if you're somebody who is a slicer of the golf ball, you'll often do the opposite type of motion to that. You'll be keen to get the hands moving down onto the back of the ball. This shoulder will stay up. You'll end up swinging too much across the ball with an open face. So the first thing I would start to do is I'd start to change that, and you've almost got to get the feeling that the hands are really working upward, okay, like so. But practice against the wall, okay? So get yourself a foot away from the wall and try and get your hands moving up the wall, okay, like so. Can you see what I'm doing here? So I'm trying to feel like I'm swinging my hands slightly out towards the right of my target, and then I'm moving up. And it's the upward motion which is going to help us do this, okay, which is going to basically it's the key thing. Because if I can get that feeling of moving my hands up the ball, can you see the way it tilts the spine more, which means I can really hit up on the ball, and then I can just practice that releasing action. But the reason why you can't produce that drawing motion is for a couple of reasons. One, because when you go to the range, you're not picturing an excessive drawing shape. That's my first piece of advice. That's how you're going to discover it, is playing around with, instead of just aiming straight, pick a target in the distance, but try and move the ball around something towards your right side for a right-handed golfer, because that's going to kind of give you some of that feedback and how much you need to exaggerate it. Then what you want to start doing is you want to start understanding, well, it's not just about moving the hands to the right, because you could kind of do that this way. You've got to go up with the hands, you know, like a tennis shot, hit up on it, like a forehand. It's upward, okay? And then the last little piece of the puzzle is if you can start doing that, picturing the right of the target, get that feeling of the hands going up the wall like so, then you can just incorporate a bit of release to close that face, and you're very quickly going to go and produce more of a draw-by shape. So an element of creativity is very important, particularly if you're trying to learn a skill. And I would also say, when I meet students and they're a little bit worried about making swing changes, I would go, look, don't worry about it. Just imagine that you're just trying to learn a different type of ball flight. You're trying to learn a new skill, and therefore you're never going to break the thing you've got. See you soon.